Hello, everyone. It's really my great pleasure to welcome you all here. I'm Tina Palajic, and I'm going to be your host today in this conversation with our wonderful activist in residence, Kanika Gupta. This conversation is organized within the Taking Care project with the whole title Taking Care, Ethnographic and World Cultures Museums as Spaces of Care. And I'm also a national coordinator of the project here in the Slovene Ethnographic Museum in Ljubljana. So before we start, let me say a few words about the project. I think it's really important for you to understand why we are organizing this residency. So the Taking Care project is a large-scale European cooperation project led by the Weltmuseum in Vienna and co-funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. It brings together 13 ethnographic and world cultures museums from 11 European countries to think about their histories and their collections in addressing the climate change and challenges that this brings for the planet and all living beings. So the focus of the project is on the one hand on the climate change and its consequences, and on the other on non-European collections and different indigenous knowledges, values and practices that can be found in those collections. Our aim is to explore these collections and their relations to longer histories of resource extraction, of species extinction, human and cultural degradation, in order to understand these collections as possible source, or maybe a better word is as an inspiration for reimagining more sustainable and equitable futures. So within the project, we explore several different topics in a program of conferences, workshops, small-scale meetings, and also artist and activist-based residencies. So the main idea behind the residencies in this project is that they are meant to be site and context specific. So the activist or artist in residence should be aware of the specific historical context, specific social situation in the country where they are working. And based, this is extremely important, based on the dialogue and strong exchange between museum curators, the collections, and the residents' inspiration, poetics, and politics. So the main idea is to bring an expert from outside of the institution, to bring fresh ideas, new perspectives, different approaches to work with our collections, to work with our heritage. So the Slovene Ethnographic Museum has decided to invite an art historian, Kanika Gupta, who is also a trained dancer and has experience in filmmaking. She holds a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi on the ancient Indian motif, the female and the tree. She authored several research papers on ancient Indian sculpture, aesthetics, painting, and mythology, and also published a book in 2019 on Lupadake. I hope, Kanika, I pronounced it correctly, Lupadake, unknown master sculptors of India, of ancient India. So Kanika has also worked on several research projects related to cultural heritage, and she has numerous experience with teaching students at different universities in India. So as an expert in Indian art and material culture, we decided to invite her to work with the museum Indian collection. So welcome to the Taking Care conversation, Kanika Gupta.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very, very generous introduction.
Yeah, we are really happy to have you here. So maybe we can start with a little bit, with a more personal, let's say, account. And tell people that our collaboration has already started more than a year ago, and that despite the distance between us, you being there in New Delhi and me being here in Ljubljana, we have had quite, how can I say, productive exchange. At least this is my perspective, and I'm really happy that that this was possible in this time. And I would also at this moment like to thank you for your flexibility and your patience with this residency, with organizing it all. And of course, for all the work that you have already done and that we will also speak about a little bit later. So we have to tell that your residency had initially been planned for the spring last year, right? For the May and June 2020. But of course, due to the pandemic situation, we had to postpone it. And this year we actually faced or are still facing similar difficulties, similar challenges. And we have had to postpone your arrival for the second time.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah, and the situation is still unpredictable. We have no idea when the traveling from India to Europe or to Slovenia will be possible again. So this is the reason why we decided to organize this online pre-program to share some of the ideas for the residency and also some of the outcomes that have already been made within a year that we collaborate. So maybe, Kanika, we can start with, this is my suggestion, that we start with the residency and really briefly speak about it and about what you will be doing here, about your ideas, about your vision and understanding of the residency, and then move on to a really interesting topic. You will share with us some of the insights into our Museum Indian collection. You were here in 2018, so you...
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Working also on our museum collection. You will be sharing some of the results of your research. So first, let's start with the residency. Can you tell us what you'll be doing here? What will be your activities? And maybe you can also share what inspires you in our collection, in your work, of course.
Yeah, firstly, of course, I'd really like to thank the museum for giving me this very wonderful opportunity to be part of this this event. And I'm again also very thankful to you for your patience throughout this long period where we really had to struggle with so many things because of these times. Yes, I think the residency poses some very interesting questions to us. And firstly, I would say that the residency is named taking care. So it points at the very fact that it is connected to environmental issues that we are facing across the world today. And I think I would not be wrong if I say that India faces this in a much more difficult way than Slovenia does. I think I should really point out that Slovenia still has such a large forest cover. And India, at one point of time in history, had extremely dense forests. And there are references to these dense forests in ancient Indian texts, which I will talk about in my coming lecture as well. But it's very important for us in India especially, and also in Slovenia on several aspects, to understand that we have this heritage left with us in some way. And it is every one of us duty to be able to preserve it and take care of it, and which is why taking care, I think. So that is one of the running themes that is part of this residency, my work that I will do in this residency, and also the work that I've been doing in the past before I came across this museum collection and this residency program. So, and coming to the collection in the museum, I think it is a very rich collection in the sense that the museum has a set of prints and some metal objects and a couple of other objects as well. But today I'm going to talk only about the prints. And I had an opportunity to document and accession all the prints. The last time I was in Ljubljana in 2018, the prints are around 582 approximately. Of course, there are certain repetitions within this collection, but We have a great diversity within these prints, which depicts the visual culture which was circulating in the early 20th century in India. And this is the visual imagery which becomes extremely popular and it becomes extremely influential. And we're going to see that within these prints, within these visuals, we have some extremely important underlining factors which influence the Indian minds. They also talk about the middle class aspirational values. They talk about environment in a certain way. We also notice that there are currents of unification of India or nationalism. There is a nationalist discourse happening in these prints. There is also a European aesthetic, the colonial aesthetic, which is seeping in and is very evident in these prints, which also becomes very popular. It still overtakes India in a very big way. It is continuing in several ways. So these are some of the running themes which are part of the collection as well as my work. So there are two major outcomes which I will be sharing throughout this residency. And one is a documentary film. I would also call it an experimental documentary film, which I have made as part of this residency. I would say that this film has been possible because of this residency. So, and this is a very personal film. So it is the story of my childhood house that I was born and brought up in. And due to some circumstances, the house had to be brought down. And I think this happened, yes, this happened around 4 to 5 years ago from now on. And back then, when I actually started shooting, it was an extremely extempore, very emotional reaction to the whole incident of my childhood memories, my grandparents' place where they made me a girl, where I grew up with them. So all of these things, which and they suddenly came down, and I couldn't really adjust emotionally to this whole change so suddenly. I'm going to talk about the reasons later, but then back then it was a very sudden extempore, a very sensitive emotional reaction for me to just pick up my camera as a filmmaker, as a photographer, and to shoot as perhaps a memory of what is going to be no more very soon. Back then I did not know what am I going to do with the footage. I think halfway I was shooting this now I would call it a film, but I didn't know what I'm going to do with it. And somewhere down the line in that year I realized that yes, this story needs to be told, and if I don't tell the story, then I'm really compromising not just on my own behalf, but I need to tell the story for the people who are witnessing something very similar across the world and perhaps are not able to speak of it. So yes, that is why the film today. And I did not have the funding for to edit this, and it is only because of this residency that I've been able to finally find an editor. And my editor, in fact, is here in the audience today, Argadeep Roy. So thank you, Argadeep, for editing this film. I did not find an editor. I had no funding, and I really have to thank this residency. If I had not been able to be part of this residency, this film would have remained unedited. So yes, that's one of the outcomes. And the other is a performance. So I have trained as a Kathak dancer. Kathak is a North Indian classical dance form. And as a child, I grew up learning this dance form. And you'll also see one clip of me as a very young girl. This is very old footage. This is 10-year-old, which I've decided to just show a clip of in my film. So I grew up learning this dance form. But then traditionally in Kathak, we are taught to dance to devotional themes, to Saraswati Vandana. Saraswati is a Hindu Brahmanical goddess. Or we are taught to Radha Krishna love affair. So Radha and Krishna are these archetypal Indian lovers. But then I began questioning my own dance practice eventually. And I wanted to ask these questions, that what do I do with the dance practice, and why can I not tell my own stories through it? So I would say that yes, at one point of time, I completely felt frustrated with what I was doing, not because I did not like the aesthetics of the form I was practicing, but of course, I also was introduced to several other European American dance forms. But then I began questioning further possibilities within the dance form that I was taught as a child. And it is that I wish to explore. And then I have consciously chosen some ancient Indian stories which talk not just about the environment in a certain way, but about gender, about how the whole idea of feminine and female body has been perceived. So I thought that I think it is my responsibility to bring back certain stories which have possibilities of newer interpretations within them. And I think as a storyteller, as an art historian, I think I am first a storyteller. So it is my job to tell stories and to reinterpret history in a certain way. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do through my performance. So these are two outcomes of the residency that I've been able to do only because I got this residency. Otherwise, I had these projects in mind since very, very long, and I really had no way of materializing them. So yeah.
Yeah, so there will be an artistic performance and also a documentary film. But we also have to mention that you will be working with our museum collection again, together with our curator Ralph Cheplak-Minsin. So you have already done some research into those prints that you mentioned, but there are approximately 500 other objects that you will be working with when you come next time. So this will be, and Ralph is also here today with us. Hello, Ralph. So yeah, you will have on the one hand more scientific work, let's say, scientific approach, and on the other there will be more communication and sharing of this heritage with our audience. Kanika, maybe we can use this opportunity to share the trailer of your documentary film, if you agree.
Yes, I think it would be great if we did that.
It's a very short video.
And we'll be releasing this film on the 1st of June in that lecture. So, yeah.
Can you see it? Kanika, is everything okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so a pre-screening of your film, Kanika, will be on the 1st of June the same time, so 11 a.m. here in Ljubljana and 2:30 in New Delhi. But it will be limited for only 30 people. So please register in advance if you want to join us. So Kanika, maybe we can move on and really speak about prints.
Yeah. Just to add one word, there was a slight lag in the video. So I'd just like to tell everyone that the museum will be uploading this video on the museum YouTube channel, and it will be available for everybody to see. So we're sorry for the lag, but yeah, the trailer will be available on YouTube now.
Thank you for adding this. Yeah, so you already mentioned that you work with our prints in our Museum Indian collection, which were made in India in the beginning of the 20th century and collected by Slovene missionaries that were active in the Bengal mission in the 1930s. So this is the link. This is how they came to the museum. First, they were kept by the Mission Museum in Ljubljana, and after the Second World War, they were transferred to the Slovene Ethnographic Museum. What I'm interested in is this historical context. Can you briefly tell us about the time in India when those prints were created and also then collected by our missionaries?
I think this is a very, very turbulent period in Indian history, no doubt. We are talking about early 20th century, and the prints primarily come from 1920s, 30s, some even 40s. And yes, there is, of course, a very strong freedom struggle going on at this time. We have the Congress Party, which is still a political party in India. We have Congress becoming a very strong political party. This is just to place a very, very basic Indian historical timeline in the minds of people. We have the Congress holding a session every year back then. And in the 1929 session, we have them give a call for what we call as the Purun Swaraj, or complete independence. So that is happening politically. We have a lot of people, Indian personalities, we call them freedom fighters, and they are emerging as extremely influential figures back then. And of course, the most well-known of these in Europe and America is no doubt Mr. Gandhi. So Gandhi has already become extremely successful when he was in Africa. And when he comes to India, he's already being celebrated. And at this time, he's really at the peak of his influential lifetime. Then we have several other political figures, and we see a lot of these figures feature in the posters of this time. So there is a category in your posters known as the propaganda art or propaganda posters. And at that time, we have a lot of art catering to this one purpose. It's not just the posters. It's also the music, the theater, the puppetry that is happening at that time. There's a lot of art which is being created for a particular agenda of nationalism, unification, and toward aiming at the idea of achieving freedom. So yes, that is happening politically. But then there is so much more happening in this period of time in Indian history, which really influences the way Brahmanical mindset or the Hindus see their gods and goddesses. And I think this is a time where the British art school tradition is being introduced to India. So we suddenly have the coming of studio practice in India like never before. So in Indian traditional painting system or sculpture system, it is completely based on memory drawing. The Indian artist has never really drawn from a light study. That is the basis of European art, the European oil painting tradition. So this is a very different idea of understanding a human body or understanding space through memory drawing. But then in this early period, we have the coming in of British academic style. And that brings in the whole idea of European oil painting to India. There are Europeans who are coming to India, painting Indian themes, Indian ruins, the monumental ancient ruins of India in that tradition. We have Indian artists who were traditionally made drawing in the Indian tradition now trying to copy these European ideals. And within this background, we have an artist known as Raja Ravi Verma emerge. And this artist becomes extremely successful. So he is an artist from Kerala. I'm not going to go into the political history of that place, but he trains under some people and learns to paint in oil on canvas. And he masters the tradition. Now, there is something very beautiful about what he does, and that is that he is using European aesthetics of perspective, of drapery, of space, of the way the human bodies are to be made. But he's painting Indian themes, Indian mythological stories. And when I say Indian mythological stories, we really need to understand that he's particularly focused on upper caste Hindu mindset. So we look at the goddesses of upper caste Hindus, that is Lakshmi, for instance. We see the goddess of wealth. We see Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge. We see a plethora of mythologies from different sections of Indian texts and myths. All of that Raja Ravi Verma paints, but following the aesthetics of the European oil painting. So the costume remains Indian. You'll always see the Indian female body draped in an Indian sari, but the rest of it becomes completely non-Indian. He sometimes tries to create a sect, but then at other times he also he does something very interesting. He places his characters in a forest. So it becomes a background-less sort of a space where you don't have to confine to the aesthetics or the architecture of any particular era. So it becomes timeless. And then you have these male-female bodies dressing up like early 20th century. They don't dress up like ancient Indians. They dress up according to the contemporary time of Ravi Verma. But the way of painting is directly coming from the oil painting tradition. So that is one. And I think the other very important tradition is the coming of the cinema, the talkies. And we really are, I think in India, we really need to, I understand these are very difficult times, but we need to be celebrating this year as the 100th birth anniversary of Satyajit Ray. I think in 1955, he makes Pathar Panchali, and which was a breakthrough in world cinema, I think, because of the realism that he portrays in Indian cinema. So we already have the coming in of talkies. We already have the coming in of these actresses and singers emerging on the Indian stage and screen. We have theater. Theater becomes a very big influence. A lot of scholars have talked about how theater influences the paintings of not just Raja Ravi Verma, but also a lot of prints that you have in your collection. So that is another influencing factor. And then, of course, the presence of the camera. I think that was really, really path-breaking in the way it has shaped the kind of art that is in your collection, in the print. So we have one of the most influential figures we have is Raja Deen Dayal. Raja Deen Dayal was a photographer of the early 20th century, late 19th century, who is commissioned by all the royalty houses, all the princely states of India, to document and to photograph the king, the daughters, the women, the nautch girls, the dancing girls. And a lot of these photographs are obviously aimed at showing off their prestige, their power. So you'll also have sometimes, it's very interesting, you'll have a group of royal men sitting with nautch girls. And who are these nautch girls? They're primarily, obviously, prostitutes. So they pose with a lot of alcohol around them with these girls, and they're really showing off their wealth. And that emerges, that kind of aesthetics that emerges out of these photographs is also very European, because you have Raja Deen Dayal arranging the curtain in a certain way. You have him putting the drape in a certain way, in a very European oil painting tradition style. You have him putting up the furniture, a certain kind of furniture. You have him set maybe a tiger skin on the wall. And we know how hunting becomes extremely important as a means of showing off. We have this whole notion of Tis Markha, no, you killed 30 lions, tigers, whatever. So we have these ideas coming in. And the whole idea of placing a pile of books next to maybe a royal princess. So the whole idea that, oh, she can read and she is somebody who's interested in reading. So these are new ideals being created for the quote unquote modern Indian woman. What are the new expectations out of the early 20th century educated female within very, very strict boundaries? I think all of these new social factors, which have several threads in them. Colonialism, we have nationalism, we have upper caste Hindu ideas of not just society, but also aesthetics of what should be seen, what should not be seen. So we have all these ideas, I think, in these prints, very, very evident. So these are the most important influencing factors in the visual tradition that we're going to see.
Yeah, we will see some of those prints soon, but before that, I have, Kanika, so many questions for you. Maybe the first one is, what is the relevance of this collection today? Is it possible to find these prints also in Indian museums? And the next question, which is also really important, I believe, is how were those prints circulated? Were they accessible also for lower caste people or just for the elites?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting question. So we have to understand, taking your last question first, that the caste has been a very major factor in shaping Indian history, Indian society, in the way we perceive everything. So yes, I think there are still places in India where temple entry is restricted to certain castes. And it's of course very tragic. And at that time, it was extremely stringent. So I think the best reading that I can give you is Annihilation of Caste by Dr. Ambedkar. I can type all these readings for everyone of the audience. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar emerges as an extremely influential figure. And he's written several, there's a series of his writings which are available freely online. I think the most influential of this is Annihilation of Caste. So yes, people of many castes are not allowed to enter the temple. In fact, drink water from a certain tank. In fact, they're not allowed to touch a lot of people. They're supposed to, upper caste people would wash or take bath as soon as they would come anywhere near a couple of these people. So that is the stigma. And I think it still operates in many parts of India today. But at that time, it was the normal. It was absolutely normal for anybody to behave like that. And there is a beautiful film by Jabbar Patel on this. It's called Ambedkar. It's a biopic on the figure of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. But what I'm trying to say is that these prints are available to these castes, at least some of them. And they're able to buy these. And they're able to, of course, frame them in their own house. So I don't know what this does. I won't say that it solves the purpose of, your entry being restricted to a space. It does not make you any more inclusive. But yes, this visual tradition is available to them. And what is important is that the same visual aesthetics has been picked up by these, I won't say these, but certain communities. And it is very important to understand Ambedkar, I think, to understand the issue of caste, because he says that I am born a Hindu, but I will not die a Hindu. I'm born an untouchable, in fact, but I will not die an untouchable. And he converts in the last part of his life to Buddhism. So he has given rise to what we today know as the Navayana Buddhism, or the last phase of, or the newest phase of Buddhism. And the Navayana Buddhism has come up with a whole new visual tradition. So they worship images of Buddha. They worship, not worship, but they revere the image of Ambedkar. So the kind of posters and the imagery that we have emerging within this whole idea of the new Buddhism also subscribe in a certain way to this aesthetics. I'm not talking about the embellishment, the jewelry, the elaborate ornamentation, which obviously is part of upper caste Hindu gods and goddesses. But the soul, again, the aesthetics of the camera is very much intact in the new imagery of Navayana Buddhism as well. So yes, these prints were permitted, and people had access to them in a way like never before. Because of course, initially I spoke about Raja Ravi Verma. He started painting oil on canvas. That is how he begins. He's an expert, but obviously that is not available to the masses. So he decides to take up this tradition of oleographs. It is a printmaking technique where it can be monochrome, and then he goes to multicolor as well. So most of your prints are multicolor, and he begins a press in Bombay, and you have a lot of prints from that press. And his press, by the way, is not the first press. So there are several of these presses already happening, and many happen after Ravi Verma opens the press. And then these prints become oleographs, and then they are further printed. And many painters began painting in this visual tradition, and their paintings were converted into prints. And these are the prints that you have. Mm-hmm. So you have prints from various artists, and then they become extremely cheap, available in the bazaars of Mumbai, Calcutta, I'm sure various other places. Definitely south of India, many cities in south of India. And we'll come to it, and I'll tell you how there is also a community involvement in how these prints have become today. We'll come to that, but yes, these prints are available in the bazaars, in the open market spaces at a very cheap rate. So these, obviously, it's very easy for anyone to collect. Anybody is able to afford them. So yes, they penetrate a space which the oil paintings of Ravi Verma could have never penetrated. And yes, Ravi Verma himself says that he's degenerating in a certain way because the aesthetics are obviously sometimes compromised. But then he really wanted to, I think, make them available for larger influence. And yes, I think definitely there are many art galleries in India which collect these prints, similar prints, and they are available for sale online. So you even have Amazon selling a lot of these prints. You have a lot of Indian galleries selling these prints. So we have the Indian Art Fair and the Art Biennale. These are major contemporary art events which happen in India, and all of these events will have galleries which will have some of these prints for sale. And the price, of course, will vary depending on which year the print was printed in, whether it is an oleograph, whether it is Ravi Verma's, whether it is not. But the paintings, the original paintings of Ravi Verma are extremely high priced, and they have made it to the auction houses, of course. So yes, but then there is one very important project. I think that is the Priya Paul collection, and she has created a project called Tasveer Ghar. So I can share the information with everyone here, and they have a huge collection of posters, of posters. But I would say a lot of their collection is not like your collection. There is something very special about the collection that the museum has, and that is that your collection has immense diversity. And that diversity I have not very easily seen in any of these art galleries which have similar prints, or for that matter, the Tasveer Ghar project that Priya Paul is doing. So Priya Paul's Tasveer Ghar project is available online. Her entire collection has been digitalized. It is available for people to see. And then there are certain museums. Unfortunately, there are very few. It's unfortunate that we are a little slow in realizing the artistic and aesthetic value of these prints. These are easily available today, but I think in the next coming few decades, it's going to become very difficult. So yeah, there are the collections, but they are not, I would say, being noticed in a way that they deserve to be. Yeah.
So what is special about our collection is the variety of those prints that we have. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on those motifs, because you already said that there are different ideas that those prints convey. So maybe we can go into it, and you try to present us with the ideas behind them.
Yeah.
You did a selection of them for this presentation, right? There are, I think, around 9 or 10 of them for today's talk.
Yeah, yeah. So no doubt the diversity that you have, and that is very, very unique to your collection, but also some of the prints that you have. I think some are very rare. That also makes your collection very rare, I think. So yeah, I can begin talking about this print. And here you see Lakshmi. It's called Lakshmi Devi. The title given to the print is Lakshmi Devi. Lakshmi is, of course, the goddess of wealth in Brahminical religion. And if you notice that she's sitting on something like an island, it's almost like a mass of land suspended in the air, or perhaps with water, on water. And this is my understanding of the print, that the mass of land on which she sits almost resembles the map of India. It looks like the southern peninsula of India. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing a very subtle propaganda print. We're again talking about the whole idea of nationalism. We are talking about India as a unified culture, as a unified nation. And who do we have as the goddess of this mass of land? We have a Brahminical goddess. I think we really have to take note of that. So, interestingly, you will also notice that there is an owl sitting next to her. And that owl, so every god or goddess in Brahminical religion has a Vahana. A Vahana is something like the vehicle of these gods and goddesses. So Lakshmi essentially is seen on a lotus. And you will see that she has her feet on a lotus in this print. Now, in South Indian temple sculpture and in South Indian visual tradition, we have a sister to Lakshmi. The sister of Lakshmi is called Lakshmi. And Lakshmi is representative of everything that is opposite to what Lakshmi represents. This is very, very prevalent in South Indian visual culture, but it's not so popular in the North. We have Lakshmi who has owl as her Vahan. So it is not Lakshmi's Vahan that is an owl. It is in fact Lakshmi's Vahan that is an owl. And the two sisters in the south of India are always worshipped together because you cannot divorce the two polarities according to the tradition. So therefore, you have perhaps this is definitely a unique print where we have Lakshmi as a goddess and she has an owl. So perhaps touching upon this very same idea. And you can see that there is again a Brahminical couple. You have the priest who's wearing that thread on his body. It's called a Janeyu that shows that he's an upper caste man. Brahmins are allowed to wear this Janeyu. So it clearly shows that this man is a priest. And then you have this obviously an Indian Brahminical lady, and they're conducting a puja. So it's very important for us to understand that this visual culture has so deeply penetrated into the minds of Indians that if you ask any Indian today to draw or to sketch their gods, our gods, then this is the kind of imagery we will come up with very naturally. So this is not coming, the visual aesthetics is not coming from the traditional Indian style of painting, which is not to say that all Indian traditional styles of paintings were dead by this time. But we have a very new quote unquote imagery emerging here, and it becomes so immensely popular. And a lot of these prints were put to worship. In a lot of Indian families, similar prints are still under worship. And in fact, in my own family, we have many such prints. A lot of these prints are worshipped. And then one specific print, usually of Lakshmi and Ganesh, is meant for a special puja, special ritual on the occasion of Diwali. Diwali is a festival of lights in the winter season in India. It's the most important North Indian festival. So similar prints were meant for worship on this most important festival. I think I could compare it to the idea of a plastic Christmas tree. I mean, I'm sure originally it was not a plastic Christmas tree that you would use on Christmas. It had to be a real tree, I assume. But then eventually, this is how tradition changes. And today we have such prints still under worship in a lot of North Indian families. And the film will show you, my film will show you a glimpse of how one of a very similar print is used for a complete ritual during that time. So yeah.
Can you move on, Kanika, to the next print?
Yeah. So this I chose this print because it again touches upon the regional while trying to touch upon the idea of the whole. See, the prints are trying to talk about a unification, an Indian art, an Indian culture. And yet these two prints, especially this one print, I think touches upon a very regional flavor. So here we have a story which is not so popular throughout the rest of the Indian country. This is more popular in the eastern part of India. So we have this, this in fact is the male is Krishna, and Krishna in Indian visual culture, in Indian painting, is generally depicted as blue in color. So the male body, which is blue, is generally either Vishnu. Vishnu is another Brahmanical god with 4 hands, or we have a male blue body as Krishna. So here we have a representation of Krishna. And I told you Krishna and Radha are these archetypal lovers. So we have Radha and Krishna sitting here. Now it's very interesting that Radha Krishna, the whole love affair and the stories and the myths behind this pair are so deeply popular from ancient times in India. They have become part of the singing tradition, all the traditional singing schools of India, the dancing traditions. In Kathak we dance about it, in Odissi we dance about it, in painting, in sculpture. So the story has proliferated immensely. And obviously there are so many folk versions, quote unquote folk. And there are different communities coming up with their own versions. In some of the versions, Radha is elder to Krishna. So Radha is in fact much elder to Krishna in many versions of this story. And we also have Radha who's married. So Radha is already married when she's having this affair with a much younger boy, and who's obviously something like a Casanova. So it's almost blasphemous in some versions, and they're having this love affair. So this Eastern Indian version story, this image is called Chaturali, and which means deception. Chatur is also deception. So the visual is called Chaturali. It's called deception. But what is happening here is that Radha every evening slips out of her house on some pretext. And she obviously wants to go and meet Krishna, and they have this love affair and tryst or whatever they want to do. And it's very erotic. The connotations are always very, very erotic, as opposed to what we are made to believe. The nationalist discourse, the upper caste Hindu discourse does not like the eroticism at all. I really have to point this out. But this is very, very erotic. All Radha Krishna discourses are extremely erotic. So we have Radha slipping out of the house every evening, and her in-laws and her sister-in-law become very suspicious. Then one day, the in-laws think that, oh, let us follow her. Let us see where she's going. What is she doing? And the moment she reaches Krishna on the place of their meeting, Krishna, of course, is God. He is the great God, a form of Vishnu. And he obviously knows that, today, what, Radha, somebody's following you. And then she's a little surprised. And so he tells her that, look, I will take the form of a god or goddess called Kali. Now, Kali is another Hindu goddess who is a fierce form of the female or the feminine. And she usually is depicted with her tongue sprouting out. So if you notice that in this image, Krishna has his tongue out. So he says that, Radha, I'm going to take the form of Kali, and you put flowers on my feet. So when your in-laws come, you tell them that I come to the forest every day to worship the family deity. So this is the deception that they play. And this visual is a depiction of that. So you will notice that he has a sword sort of a thing, Krishna, in his hand. That is not generally the iconography of Krishna, but that is an iconographic feature of the goddess Kali. So here he is taking the form of Kali.
Thank you, Kanika. We are actually slowly running out of time.
Okay, so we'll make it a little faster. Yes.
Yes, so maybe you can choose 1 or 2 prints. So just let me know which one do you want to.
Okay, so I think I'll quickly go through some very special features. So for example, this print again very evidently shows that it has influences of photography. it is also subscribing to the values of oil painting tradition of Europe in a certain way. So we have an art historian called John Berger, who's talking about the oil painting tradition in the sense that it is meant to represent possessions. So here we have an ideal Indian couple, and you have to have a bungalow, which thankfully has a garden, in fact, which is very important, because my film talks about the fact that today we don't think trees, plants, and gardens are essential spaces in our living space, living area, which is a very tragic thing to happen. But we clearly see the influence of the camera in this image. And I could, in fact, also compare it to a lot of pop art that was happening in America. So yeah, maybe we could go on.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I took this image because it is so evident that we have Krishan, a young blue child who's obviously Krishan, his elder brother, Balram, and Yashoda, the mother. So this is the mythological family, but we have the representation completely changes. Yeah, next.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think this is very interesting, and this is an image from the great Indian epic Ramayana. And Ramayana is again as popular in India as the story of Radha and Krishna and their love affair. But of course, it talks about extreme, stringent upper caste Hindu values. It's extremely Brahminical, and there are several contestations within the text. So we really have to understand that. And Ramayana, of course, it has been extremely politicized in recent Indian history, which is very sad, but it has many versions. Ramayana itself has thousands of versions across South Asia. So Cambodia, Sri Lanka, all of these places have their own versions. And the protagonist is Ram and Sita, and the antagonist is Ravan. So it's very interesting, and Ram and Sita are always depicted as fair-skinned. They are always quote unquote white. It might sound yeah, it's almost racist, but it also touches upon the issue of caste and aboriginals, or what we today term as the tribals. Tribals is a very complicated term which we need to reflect upon, especially within the Indian context. So Ravan is always depicted as somebody who's not beautiful, or who is not how shall I say, not fair. So you have this is the incident in Ramayana where Ram and Sita are forced into an exile in the forests, and Ravan comes and abducts. He kidnaps Sita, and this is Sita sitting in the garden of Ravan that is called Ashok Vatika. Ashok is the name of the tree. Very interesting. So he has a beautiful garden again, Ravan. And look at the way the ladies from this southern part of India, probably, and they say Sri Lanka, are represented. They are dark. They are everything that Sita is not. And what is Sita? Sita is this covered lady who covers her body in a certain way, and the black ladies don't cover their breasts. They are not beautiful. Sita is beautiful. Sita is everything that an ideal archetypal woman should be, and they are everything that she is not. So it's extremely problematic the way these female bodies have been conceived. And I think we need to understand the contestations within these Indian myths. Yeah, I think we need.
Sorry, I will just jump in for a second and invite our audience to ask anything or comment maybe on what you are just saying now. So you can use the chat box option, or also turn on your microphone, and the word will be yours. But we can go on, and if you want to do so, just let me know. Kanika, can I move on?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm also trying to find my list of reading, and I'd love to share that with the audience. So I'm just going to do that. There's a lot of academic work. Well, some academic work that has been done already, and I think some of it really calls for our attention. Just give me a minute so that I'm able to.
Yeah. Maybe if there is any question, we can let you in.
Yeah, so I've put in the chat box a list of readings, and I think some of them really problematize the idea of how female bodies are conceived in the visual tradition of this time. I would particularly like to point out Parul Dave Mukherjee's research paper on Shakuntala, a female mythological character, and how this Shakuntala is conceived by first Kalidas and then by Raja Ravi Verma, and how these ideas influence the Indian mind tremendously, and we have these replicated in these prints.
Kanika, maybe Michael can jump in. Michael?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Kanika. Thank you very much for the fascinating talk, and I look forward to seeing the process, what the process is of your residency. So when these popular prints, I assume maybe this is the first time religious prints become disseminated from a more centrally for the first time throughout the country. Has this done anything to regional understandings of stories, or maybe made certain stories become more prominent and others become less so? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I think you've touched upon something very interesting. And I think this process, yes, it was definitely augmented by these prints, because printing as a technology is new in that century, in that period. And yes, the proliferation of these prints definitely influences a lot of other local quote unquote traditions and the way they perceive their myths, yes. But there is something known as Brahmanization or Sanskritization, and that has been happening in the history of India from ancient times. So we are aware that within ancient Indian texts, there are evidences that Shiv was actually not a Brahmanical god. So there are these larger debates on how Rudra was a Vedic god, but Shiv was not a Vedic god. So Shiv has to come perhaps from a local community. And then how does Shiv become Brahmanized? So we have the Puranas, and the Puranas are subjugating sometimes and assimilating sometimes, and then imposing their own value system on a lot of these deities. And obviously, when you want to subjugate or assimilate and you superimpose your value system on these local cults, some very special essence, something very earthy about those cults is bound to fade away. So they lose their identities, acquire newer identities. And that is the process with which Brahmanization or Sanskritization has become so widespread in India today. And one of, unfortunately, the most worst or popular thing that has become proliferated is the caste system. That is how you include a whole community in the Brahmanical fold, and you don't make them Brahmins. You obviously make them untouchables. But you change their gods. You change the way they perceive their own selves. So yeah, that has been happening. But yes, these prints do play a role. And in fact, as I was saying, there is the nationalist discourse. So in the nationalist discourse, in fact, maybe we can also see the actress Kajanbai print, Tina, if you would like. So we have these actresses coming on stage, and they belong to families of Tawaids, the dancers of India of that century, the prostitute dancers. So good Indian women or girls are not permitted to dance in that society, or that the nationalist, or for that matter, the Victorian discourse. And it is these Tawaids and their daughters who preserve, who are custodians of this wealth of the dancing tradition, the singing tradition. And what do we have? We have their histories being erased because of this unification, this nationalist idea coming in through these prints also, of course. But then interestingly, we also have their own photograph proliferating. But yeah, they are very rare. Now we can compare the deity prints and the Kajanbai-like prints, which the museum has, which is also what makes their collection very special. They have 6 to 7 actress prints, and they're very interesting. They call for some very special attention.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. My name is Michael, and I work at the National Museums of World Culture in Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Pleasure.
Kanika, I also have a question, and I'm actually wondering about those missionaries that collected all those prints. What was the reason behind this collecting. And I'm wondering if you have found any documents or, you know, any, let's say, reasons for this collecting in our museum archive.
Yeah, I think one of the very important reason is the availability in the bazaars and the value. I think these prints became accessible because of the technology and in a certain way to certain people because they could be afforded. So the missionaries that we speak of, I think, in fact, we also have another curator, I think, from the museum, and she has worked a lot on the missionaries. I think I forget her name. Maybe Ralph will help me with that. So another curator from the museum is working on the missionaries, but I think the most important factor is that they were available at a certain price. And of course, I mean, we perceive the missionaries or the priesthood or the Shramanic tradition as somebody outside of the normal social world. And I don't think that is possible ever. So somewhere they are related to the society they are part of, and obviously they were going to the bazaars, they were working with the communities, they were interacting with this visual culture, and this was something very new to them. Like we have this whole idea of gods with many arms, many heads, and we have so many interpretations of it. The Europeans called them grotesque at a certain level, and it was a very new idea. So there, for instance, the most popular book is Much Maligned Monster by Partha Mitter on the same subject. So obviously there's a certain amount of attraction, a certain amount of being flabbergasted with what you're seeing in the Indian prints, because these are gods with multiple heads, arms, legs, and they're doing things which are not human. And of course, then these prints are available in a certain way at a certain price, that it becomes possible for anyone to be able to buy them.
Yeah, the person you were talking about before is our museum curator for Africa and Americas, Marco Frerich.
Okay.
That's his name. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
Maybe we can see the Kajanbai photograph in the meanwhile and just put it on the screen if possible, because it's such a beautiful photograph. And yeah, while I take more questions, the next one, I think. Yeah, this one. So we have one actress, Kajanbai. She was extremely popular. She was almost somebody who worked in the blockbusters of Indian talkies at this time. And it's strange that we know a lot about her, but the other actresses in their prints, we know very little about them. And her mother was a tawaif, a prostitute. And she died in Mumbai Ansam. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen. That's why I don't see the chat box.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, then we can go back to it. Yeah.
If there is anyone, please just turn on your mics. It's gonna be better, I think.
Kanika, can I ask you something about your performance? You're talking about coming from a very old tradition and questioning that tradition and seeing how you can have your story in that tradition, I guess. How are these circles? Are they open to evolution of these concepts, or is it quite rigid?
Yeah, I think that's also very interesting. We have another very important artist working or talking on the same lines. I think it is T.M. Krishna, and there are lots of talks that he's given, and he's really talking about this. Yes, it's very complicated. A lot of people are very stringent about the costume that you take up. So the length of the upper garment has to go to a certain, till the ankle. If it doesn't, then oh, you're being very rude. So yes, there are restrictions which, if you break through, they might be frowned upon, no doubt. And the kind of stories you want to tell. So of course, a traditional performance is supposed to begin with Saraswati Vandana. You worship the goddess of knowledge first. Then you enter into a certain kind of grammatical conversation, and then you enter Thumri. Thumri is the genre in which you express emotions, bhav. So yes, to break that cycle and to directly go into something else, or directly tell a story with dialogues in between, with English and with different languages, then, I mean, of course, they'll say it's dilution, it's not Kathak anymore. So those questions, of course, will be there. Yes. So yes, it is. I mean, whether it is accepted by the traditional Kathak fraternity or not is uncertain. Okay. Because I do not get into so much of complicated footwork and tihais and pukadas and you know, all these typical grammatical compositions. I don't necessarily use all of them, at least to begin with, now that I've begun exploring this as a genre. Yeah, I can do that, but then we have other questions perhaps then. Yeah.
Good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Kanika, another maybe announcement to make at this point. So some of those prints, as you already said, are related to the cinema, as this one we are looking at right now. And within the residency, you also plan to curate a film session. Maybe you can tell us more about it. It probably won't be online, but yeah. Anyways, it's a good opportunity for people who live here to join us and see some of the old films, Indian films.
Yeah, so I've tried to choose certain films which were not necessarily made within the era of these prints, but which talk about this age in a certain way. And then I have tried to choose 2 to 3 films which will go further back in history. So my idea is to begin with perhaps one film which dwells into the ancient times, then maybe 2 which dwell on the revolt of 1857. And then I want to move on to the early 20th century on some very not very mainstream Hindi or Bollywood cinema, but I'd like to pick up something which we would call parallel cinema or art films, and which talk and interrogate this period and the imagery and the ideas, the social ideas of this period in a certain way. So yes, I've tried to come up with a set of films, try to curate a set of films which indulge with this period with a certain perspective. So we have gender being a very important part of it, of how this whole idea of a new modern Indian female emerges, and you know what happens with this idea, and how is it interpreted, and what does it do to a lot of these Indian women. Yeah. So yes, everybody is invited in Ljubljana. I would be extremely happy if people would come and indulge in a conversation over these films and over a continuation of this tradition everywhere, not just in India. Yeah. So I would be very happy. And yeah, we also, in fact, as part of this program, we also have a poetry writing, something like a contest. So we'll be making some announcements on that. And we would be extremely happy to hear what people feel and the way they interact with forests and trees in their lives. I think that is a very important way in which ancient people as well as us today, the way we react with the nature around us, the way we react with our rivers, the hills, the forests, the trees, and what do we feel about it, and what is it that they do to us. I think we need to redwell on these ideas all the more in the 21st century.
And those poems will be used as tickets for entering your performance, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So if there are any questions, now it's time for you to jump in. Maybe Ralph, do you want to say anything?
Well, thank you very much. It was a very nice speech, a very nice talk of you, and I'm happy to see you, but of course I would wish to see you in Ljubljana as soon as possible.
Thank you so much.
We all wish that that you finally come, Kanika.
Yes, let's just hope for the best.
So I just suggest that we wrap this conversation up. I would like to thank you so much, Kanika, for sharing all your thoughts and ideas with us and your, how to say it, extensive knowledge. You really have a lot of things to say, and I'm sure we could be here for another hour or two. So yeah, I also really enjoyed the discussion, and I want to thank all of you to joining us, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the day and see you next time. It's not next week, but the week after, on the 25th of May. See you then.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you'll join us again on the 25th of this month for another conversation.